Outer Orange.
As I'm sure everybody within the community knows, there is a top dog deck that everyone's been talking about, they want restrictions on, and that is, of course, no one other than Levadress. As you guys also may or may not know, recently I made a tier list. I posted it on Twitter, and then I also made a video on it where I also streamed it, where I actually put one deck higher than Levadress, and that deck is Razel. Razel is a deck that I've always deemed to be really powerful. Today I'm going to talk to you guys about the strengths of the deck because, fun fact, it actually just won a BCS event as of yesterday. All right, y'all, let's talk about the big bad boy, Razel, its powers, its weaknesses, what we can do to counteract that, because I actually, as a player of set 5, I've been testing a lot in this format. I actually think Razel is very powerful, regardless of if you deny it or not. I kind of play into it. I think it's a very strong deck. And not that I think Levadress is any weaker. I actually think they're both really, really similar. I think if you're on either deck, you're probably going to be doing pretty well. Let's talk about Razel. What makes it so powerful? Got a new card that makes it way better. It's basically the new king, and you don't actually have to play the king in your ride line. You can play the old one in your ride line, which makes it just a little bit easier to divine skill. You don't have to like constantly hunt for that card, but you do still want per persona. So I got a new card that makes it more powerful. It has a beefier turn now. It has triple drive without actually having to divine now because of Gabrielius as well. It has the ability to stack, which is very important. It already had the ability to stack, but it's been able to stack better now, more efficiently, because Gabrielius also stacks on top and bottom. It makes really good numbers early on. I will say, depending on your build, if you're building Cadwalla focus builds or if you're going towards Minerva focus builds, depending on the build you're on, if you don't go towards the TFL Minerva builds, your numbers are weaker early on, but they get stronger as the game goes, because eventually the numbers just get too high. And also the king provides extra power buffs, and the king himself also is a higher number than old Razel, which is a 13k base. There's board presence, so this deck, if you go to Minerva route, you are constantly swarming board with cards. That's kind of like what Ketter's thing is to constantly have a board. I will say the board retires itself, but then you can also get card advantage from them, such as Dog, also Minerva getting to call 2 basically for free. Also cards like Nelburus, which draws you a card and also stacks a card for an entry blast 3. He also gets power on his own. So long story short, even though you're killing your dudes, you're also finding ways to replenish the board again for the following turn. You just have to be very careful with how you're replenishing it, because if you're killing too many of your dudes, it's hard to recover. Razel also himself revives cards, which is a very big key of why the dog is so powerful, because it keeps spamming the dog over and over again. You always get 2 cards back onto the board as well, so you can also play into that concept as well. You just have to be careful with what your hand is versus what your board state is. There's a very strong turn 2, which is very powerful. You can sometimes send your opponent to 3-4 damage, especially if you check a crit, and then everything is always hitting over a defense if you're going the Minerva routes. Cadwalla usually is able to do this unless you do like mixed like turbo builds. Some people play everything in one. Some people play just Cadwalla. With Cadwalla usually runs the grade 2 dual nation card as well with it to kind of just find more pieces faster. It just depends on the build. Every build's a little bit different. I personally prefer the Minerva build, but also denial is a thing, and Cadwalla works better if you're getting denied. This deck also, something important, has one of the better divine skills. It is a heal divine, which basically says if you check something that's not a heal, you get to just divine and heal anyway, which is important because all your triggers in your deck now become heals, and it can also save you in clutch situations. It's literally a miracle heal, and that can help you out of a really bad situation. Say you're losing, and suddenly you heal, you can regularly heal and then divine heal. I've seen Razel players triple heal in a turn, and that would definitely get them back in the game after they have like 2 cards in hand. It can happen, and that's kind of with the weights of the scale, where when things are going really badly, you can randomly recover as a Razel player, and that's also very powerful. I mentioned this earlier, but it has very consistent triple drives now. So in the past, whenever you would divine, you get access to triple drive. You would basically have an extra drive, you swing, cool, and then you would lose it. And then that's basically it. But now we have a card called Gabrielius, and Gabrielius basically says, hey, at 4 damage, you get to have an additional drive check. It does require CB, but hey, you get the additional drive check now, which is important. So you can divine on 1 turn and then triple drive another turn, or you can even divine and I believe even triple drive. You can basically just kind of pop off on your persona rides, and with all the extra powers, the king giving you the extra 5k buff. Gabrielius himself also gets additional power. Opponent can only deal with that kind of pressure so much as you're drawing cards and you're taking cards away from your opponent. I guess the main strengths, there's probably a little bit more between like the amount of cards you see in your deck and the fact that your crits you can discard. You can basically like guard with them early and then send them all back. And if you get into late game, like say if you heal early, you check a defensive OT or something like that, and you go into late game and you send back like 7 crits, you're basically you almost guaranteed usually have game. I have seen it pop up a couple times where I'm playing Levadress and my opponent's playing Razel, and basically what happens is we're both going back and forth for a while. Neither of us are dying, and then my Razel opponent is down to like basically maybe 8 cards in deck, and then they're sending back like 7 crits, and I'm like, okay, I basically basically just die here. Like I can't, because the Vanguard's gonna have triple drive, the Abilis is gonna have drive checks, really ridiculous, and at that point you just die. There's nothing you can do. So if you let the deck live too long, it also has an insanely good longevity of just checking a bunch of triggers. There's a downside to this because you're scrying with dogs so much, you're actually sometimes you're bottom decking a bunch of triggers as well, or you're drawing 2-3 triggers and then you bottom deck a bunch of triggers and then you end up checking blinks. It does happen sometimes because the deck gets so compressed. So that's another thing. Now there are some weaknesses. When it bricks, it doesn't really do anything, and that's the kind of deck's weakness. You need to find certain pieces to kind of be able to play the game. If you just open poorly or don't have a really strong grade 2 turn, the deck instantly kind of falls off a little bit in power, and you can kind of capitalize on that. If you are very certain that your opponent's playing a Minerva build, you can also just deny the first damage. Leverages can very easily do this since they ride up for free on turn 2. So you can just ride up to turn 1, if they're going first, or you can ride up to your turn 1 and just pass and just not swing. You got your extra card from going second, and then you just don't swing. And then next turn you get to not discard right up to 2, and you can choose to swing here or not, but you can also actually pass here and just deny your opponent damage. It is a way to kind of deal with the deck. I'm not saying it's optimal, I'm not saying it's always going to work in your favor, but it is something that you can do, especially if you can afford to lose the card. And it will help you because they lose the draw 2, call 2, which means that they're just not drawing 2 cards, and if they're bricking, now they're super bricking, and it might be in your favor to do that. It just depends on your situation, what your hand's looking like. I personally usually deny if I just have no shield, or if my shield is super low and I know I don't want to go to 4 damage, I usually just won't swing. I'll just pass. Sometimes you have a hand with all grade 3s, really can't take a turn with like 23k beaters every single lane, right? So what you do is just don't swing. Another weakness the deck has is sometimes it just doesn't draw what it wants. Sometimes it just draws all of the triggers and it just doesn't see, like for example Noburius, or it just won't see the Tearfall, or it just won't see the dog. Hand size as Razel gets worse, which means you can't live for the longevity, which means you start losing the game. The deck gets stronger and stronger as the later the game goes, but if it can't get to the late game, it starts struggling, so it starts falling off. It does require CV for full power, so they really need to see their counter charge, and if they don't, that deck also falls off. So something to kind of keep in mind is someone who's playing against the deck, keep track of their drop zone. If they don't have the counter charger, you can probably play around that aspect. Maybe just don't swing face. If they just gotta have to hope they have it. If you look at most lists in the top decks, most lists are actually only running 2 counter chargers in their entire deck, so they have to find it. If they don't find it and they kind of went really heavy on CB, guess what? They might be stuck with doing nothing for a turn, but you have to take that gamble with what's in their hand. So something to kind of keep in mind. You don't have a lot of knowledge of their hand, especially if they're doing dogs and Noburius' abilities. Sometimes you just don't know what their hand's looking like. Now, if you're enjoying this content, do not forget to like and subscribe. You guys seem to really enjoy my level dress videos, so hopefully this one is enjoyable to you too. This deck also isn't as strong going second. It's still really powerful because it can beat your skull in, but I will say going second, the deck's a little bit weaker since you're stuck on the old king and you're not on the new king, and that is basically a turn behind because you go from the old to the new one. Sometimes you're forced to divide early and that can go against you. It just kind of falls off a little bit in the power scale. It's still powerful. It could just sometimes be less powerful. Of course, if you divide early, again, it'll just depend on your hand. You hear me a lot mentioning this, but your hand matters a lot in Razel. Like what you end up mulliganing can kind of sometimes solidify your whole game. If you're sitting there with a bunch of triggers of PGs, it's kind of really hard to recover. Or the other way around, if you're sitting with a bunch of Razels in your hand and really nothing else, you don't really want to call the Razel. Sometimes you're forced to, but you don't want to. In an ideal situation, you always just want to see your grade 2s and your grade 1s, maybe 1 or 2 copies of your Razels, and the Gebel is somewhere between all that, and you're usually sitting pretty well because after that, your draw engine will find you all your triggers and your PGs and everything else. If you're a player out there trying to fight this deck, you got to keep in mind of what the deck is going to do because it is an extremely linear deck. It will basically do the same thing over and over again. So you just have to keep in mind what's in the drop zone, what you've seen revealed, and kind of put in your head like what you're about to face. I'll usually look at my hand and go, okay, is it worth giving the damage? Is it worth pushing their game plan? Do I need to give them the damage to push my game plan? Do I need to kill them sooner? What kind of deck am I playing? Am I playing a deck that can aggro kill them fast? Can I go for the slow game? Can I deal with the deck late game? Like these are the kind of questions I should ask myself when I face decks, and Razel is no exception to that. Very surprised that more people are talking about the power of Razel, because if you're playing like a normal deck into Razel, it's very, very not good for you. I think the only upside into Razel, I mentioned this before, is actually burst decks in some capacity. If you're swinging for really high columns, usually Razel doesn't have the hand to be able to guard that stuff. It just depends on what they see. But if they're going second into like a really strong burst deck, ideally they'll usually not be able to guard it. They'll have to take it. The deck does run a bunch of grade 3s, very similar to how Levadress is. Levadress also runs a bunch of grade 3s, and due to that, sometimes their hand is just, they just have no guard in hand. I'll recommend looking at what they're dropping for discard. If they're pitching Getwellies, it's very possible their hand's actually pretty healthy, but if they're pitching triggers, then that means that pieces in their hand, and maybe their hand's not very healthy. But that's basically how I deal with Razel. I will not lie, I don't think this matchup is easy. I actually think this is one of the hardest matchups. In some cases, I actually think it's even harder than Levadress, because while Levadress is annoying, Razel is no exception either. I know I bring this up, I know I'm going back and forth between the two decks as I'm talking about Razel mainly here, but I just really need to make it clear just how powerful that deck is. I've been seeing a lot of people going on and on about banning Levadress, but there really is like another deck that probably needs to be looked at as well. Maybe not right this very second, second, but people are really missing the powerhouse of Razel. Like I said, it did just win a BCS, and Love Adjust did get second. And I'm not saying that the other BCSs don't matter or that they're any lesser or anything, because the other ones also had Love Adjust. But I think people are very underestimating that Razel is also up there. It's also a powerhouse deck. It's also very hard to fight into, and it's also can just blow you out of the water. A deck that draws better than you, that also has triple drive, that also bans 7x triggers, that can also miracle heal, is a pretty powerful deck. So you should definitely be on the lookout for that. But I definitely think it's one of the strongest decks this format by far. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. 50cards.shop if you need any of your goodies. Code Orange to save yourself some money. Hope this was informative to you. BCSs are happening a lot in February. Got quite a few going on. I'll be going to some of them. Hope to see you guys there. Enjoy, good luck, and as best of all, enjoy the game. There's been a lot of people not really enjoying the game, and a lot of people are not enjoying this set. I've personally been strange enough enjoying this set. I don't know why. Maybe I just like playing Love Address. Maybe I just missed Archaea. Maybe I just like the format we're in. I don't know what's going on. And if you have anything to say, if you have any additional interests or anything you feel that I'd missed and you want to discuss it, feel free to comment it. It's okay. I've noticed some people in the Love Address video also made some comments like, hey, by the way, you can also do this, which is also informative. Though they mentioned Blackmire. Blackmire actually turns off tokens, which is something I didn't even know about until I actually tried it myself. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right, the tokens do turn off. Something I might have missed. Like I said, I don't test into every single deck in the format. It's just impossible at this point. There's just like 70, there's over like 70, 80 decks, you know. So if you have something that you know that might help the matchup, or you think might be beneficial, or other way around, or you think the matchup's bad, whatever it is, feel free to let me know below. And then, guys, thanks so much for watching. Peace out. Das vidania. See you guys in a future video. Bye.